Thank you, Esme, very much indeed. Now, this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and that title alone covers an awful lot of ground. One part of our population where there have been big strides forward in breaking down walls, but where they're still faced by an underbelly of prejudice and discrimination, is the transgender community. And the mental health charity Bristol MIND Trans Helpline has had a successful first couple of months. Liz Sorapur is from Bristol MIND, joins me. Hello, Liz.
Hi. Thanks
very much indeed for coming in. And writer and broadcaster Cheryl Morgan transitioned man to woman some 20-odd years ago. Is that right, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Liz, first of all, I mean, to my mind, and this is all opinion and how people see things, but it seems to be a much more open world, much more accepting, particularly among young people. Are those prejudices still very, very much there, though?
They are. I mean, I think younger people are finding it easier to sort of question or look at or want to explore their gender identity, and I think that's a very positive thing, but there's definitely still a lot of discrimination and stigma attached to people that are considering that process or kind of just wanting to, you know, to find a life where they feel more themselves.
I suppose in many ways, I mean, to look at it in sort of a crass way, kids grow up knowing how technology works. They just accept it, whereas older people maybe don't and find that harder to get into. In some ways, that's what it is, isn't it? It's a different world for different generations in accepting.
Yeah, well, I think it's historically, if you look at the LGBT, so people, you know, look at laws around homosexuality and that have gone through. So I think society is progressing. It feels to us that, but it's taking time, and it's you know, it's important that people are able to be themselves. And I think the reason that we've got involved is that obviously for Mind and the way we want to challenge stigma and any discrimination, and we're seeing lots of people who are trans experiencing a lot of discrimination, and that's affecting their mental health.
You must have seen a heck of a lot of change in the last 20 years since you transitioned, Cheryl.
It certainly has been quite dramatic. The changes in legislation, for example, in going from when I transitioned, I had no civil rights at all, basically. I was going to be legally male for the rest of my life, no matter what I did about it. And then a few years later, magically, we had the Gender Recognition Act, and then.
But what about attitudes? What about how people would relate and react towards you?
I think there's a lot of change in visibility, and that's helped a lot. I think in that back when when I was a kid, I had no idea, and I knew that something was wrong with me, but I couldn't put any name on it or anything like that. And then slowly,
you say something was wrong with you. Is that how you felt at the time?
Well, clearly there was something wrong, because I was going to school as a young child and essentially meeting girls for the first time, because there hadn't been any young girls around where I lived, and I could see that boys and girls were quite different, and that really I wanted to, you know, I was one of them, not one of them. Yeah. But I couldn't. You know, all I knew was that if I said anything about it, I would be off down the educational psychologist.
Do you face? I mean, you're a successful woman. You broadcast. You're in the sci-fi side of things, aren't you, as well, in San Francisco and all sorts of things. Yeah. But do you face prejudice now? Do you get people calling things to you in the street?
I don't get a lot of stuff in the street. I'm reasonably lucky in that, you know, I appear to, you know, as the phrase goes, pass for female. That I look acceptably feminine, so people don't tend to spot me that often, but they do occasionally, and when they do, there's generally some insult or something along those lines.
The helpline's been going since February,
yes.
And before that there wasn't an awful lot of support, was there? A lot of things happening.
Not specifically for trans, no.
You obviously won't go into what's said, you know, directly on the helpline, but what sort of issues, what sorts of things are you hearing more and more of? So
I think what we've noticed is that a lot of the callers are actually older, or sort of 40 plus, that age group, and that's interesting what we were talking about earlier, about the kind of whether it's easier for younger people to transition, and they're talking about sort of these life-changing decisions that they're contemplating, and not so much that they have an issue with transitioning, it's the effect on their families and their friends and their life. I mean, you know, people have to face maybe losing their jobs, which shouldn't be on the.
How did your family react, Cheryl?
It took them a while. My father had died before I came out. My mother took quite a while to get used to it, and my brother as well, and there was other members of the family as well.
Is there any element of confusion still in your life? at this minute?
Confusion them for me?
For you,
No.
yes. None whatsoever as far as you're concerned. You're just a complete woman, and you look back on this history as just that, a strange part of your upbringing.
Yeah, it's something that happened to me. I don't know why. Scientists don't know why. Medical people and whatever are looking into it. They can't, as yet, find any causes to it. And I just have to roll with it and get on with my life.
Do you see yourself as a role model then for young people who find themselves?
No, I mean, that would be presumptuous of me.
Well, no. I mean, modesty aside, though, people must look towards you, and you're well known in the society and so on.
No, not really. Yeah. No. I mean, in any case, the trans community is extremely diverse, and I represent one particular end of a spectrum. In many ways, I'm a hideous stereotype.
What are we struggling to deal with as a society? I mean, we keep talking about gender-specific loos and all that kind of stuff. Keeps coming up time and time again in schools and all the rest. But what is the big thing that needs to be overcome, do you think, next in society to help to deal with this?
Well, I think people just need to be asked themselves if just because somebody is different or is different to me, that's not necessarily something to be fearful of. I think a lot of prejudice is based on fear or ignorance and not knowing, and then that leads to discrimination. So I think our quest is to support trans people or those that are just wanting to explore their identity on the helpline.
Do we have numbers? Do we know what size of community we're talking about in Bristol here?
I'm not sure what in Bristol.
The official government estimates are about 1% of the population, but that was based on people wanting to change from one binary gender to another. The real number is probably quite a bit higher than that. And then on top of that, there's the intersex population as well, which is in many ways a different kettle of fish.
Well, we put up that number, and there's your website as well. If people do want to get in touch, all the information is there. Just remind us of the website.
www.bristolmind.org.uk.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. There's a big news story involving the transgender community actually in the papers today, as chance would have it, Cheryl. So I'll bring you back to talk a bit more about that in a bit on the programme. Also to come, a top line-up on winners and losers this week, and the man who laughs for a living. Stand by to tweak your cheeks and relieve that stress with a Joe Hoare guffaw. What on earth am I talking about? I ask that question all the time. Anyway, you'll find out after these short messages. And one thing I will promise you, it won't cost you a penny. So stay there. We'll be back very, very soon on Crunch the Week, coming up in just a moment or two. See you in a bit. Still with me is Cheryl Morgan, who we met earlier, talking about the harsh side of being transgender and indeed the pleasures of that as well. You were telling me earlier actually that when we talk about Mental Health Awareness Week and we talk about hate crime and prejudice and all that sort of thing, mental health is now out of the agenda, really, isn't it, as far as
it's one of the big changes that's happened, Steve, between when I first came out and now, is that when I first decided to transition, being trans was seen as you were crazy, in the same way as being gay was seen as a mental illness back in the day. And nowadays, thankfully, the doctors are much more understanding about the whole thing. And what they say now is that trans people often do have a lot of mental health problems because of the social prejudice that they face, and because of the difficulties that some people face in their inner self not matching up with their body. So people do get stressed about that sort of thing. They do have mental health problems, but being trans of itself is not a mental illness.
I find it interesting that I don't know if you saw the news yesterday when you saw Eddie Izzard, going through certain parts of Bristol with a certain MP and knocking on doors, and Eddie was dressed, the usual way, with a jacket on the top and these high heel shoes, and yet the public would never have accepted it in the same way 20, 30 years ago. It just wouldn't have happened. But they didn't turn a hair, did they?
We had Boy George.
Yeah? Well, yes, we got Boy George, but Boy George was kind of slightly more flamboyantly dressed up in a way. Yeah. But here was somebody just going through the street, talking politics, but in a pair of high heel shoes.
Yeah, the politics is different, but we tend to forget that Andy Warhol had trans women in his films, and this was back in the 1970s, the whole Lou Reed thing with Walk on the Wild Side. That was a big deal for me when I was a kid. Yeah. And that now is, 40 years ago?
Yeah. Do the discussions about, you know, I think I heard the other day there were 71 different types of ways of describing your gender. There was me thinking men and women and transgender, maybe 3, but you know, we got all the binaries, the non-binaries, the gender fluid, 71, which is a nonsense, isn't it, really?
Well,
surely.
The issue here is that you're conflating sex and gender. Now, sex is a biological thing, and people tend to think that there are only 2 sexes, but in fact, if you know a little bit about biology, there are people who are all sorts of shades in between as well. But leaving that aside, gender, when the term gender is generally a social construct, that how you present yourself to society, how you feel about yourself, and in that way you can invent more. And other cultures through history have had more than 2 genders. You know, in past times there were loads of people who were eunuchs, and they were often regarded as a 3rd gender. Some of the native North American tribes had 4 genders.
Let's look at a story that's hitting the papers today. I'm sure you saw this one. It's in a lot of the papers. It's been in a lot of the news as well. This is police swapping helmets for baseball caps to woo transgender recruits, albeit this is the Daily Mail, so let's leave the headline necessarily. But that's what the story basically is. You know, it's gender neutral. Is there a danger, do you think, Cheryl, that we're getting rid of genders and sort of, I don't know, getting into one sort of non-descriptive gender? Shouldn't we be celebrating the difference between the genders?
But Steve, you were just telling me that having 71 genders was ridiculous, and now you only want to have 2.
No, I mean, let's have 5, I don't know, but we can have as many as we like, but shouldn't we be celebrating each of those genders rather than being gender neutral where there isn't a gender at all in some ways?
Yeah. No, the issue here is not that we're trying to make everybody the same, but we're putting everybody on an equal footing, and I see this more of a feminist issue than as a trans issue. The Daily Mail likes to make everything about trans people.
Well, it's in the Telegraph and radio stations as well.
But you know, in terms of female police officers, if they have the same uniforms as the men, then they're not standing out in any particular way as being female. They can do the job in exactly the same way, and they have the same equipment. And I would imagine that police force has done it because it's cheap. They don't have to have 2 separate types of hats anymore.
That could be a very good point, actually. Does language upset you? I mean, we're in the age of offence, aren't we? And I think a lot of people are scared to say anything in case they say the wrong thing. You know, if you say policeman or policewoman, you're jumped upon. You know, have we gone too far in that direction?
Yeah, I'm a writer, so I try hard to remember that words can change their meanings and can mean different things to different people. But equally, there are real issues here. I mean, I do a lot of work with Sorry, the hate crime charity, and they have people who have insults thrown at them in the street. They have insults thrown at them as they're being beaten up, and it's inevitable that people find those terms upsetting.
What's the next big change for you? Do you think, you know, is there anything else? Have we got over the main hurdle now, do you think, in acceptability?
No, I think we're in severe danger now of going backwards.
Really?
Almost all of the LGBT-friendly legislation that we've had has been forced upon us by the European courts. We're now going to be leaving Europe. The chances are, sadly, that the Tories are going to win the next election with a big majority. And there's a large number of people in the Tory party who voted against same-sex marriage, who voted against the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act, and they can't wait to get rid of them. Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of electioneering to come, I think, and it'll be fascinating to see what comes out of all that. Delight to have you on the programme, Cheryl. Thanks very much, Steve, for coming in.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now in part 4, Brain of Bristol. Enough about me. We look forward to next Thursday's Battle Royal at the Grand Hotel for the ultimate in red carpet pub quizzes. It's all in aid of the Julian House charity. And after the break, we meet Bristol's most famous son. Well, almost. That's coming up after these short entreaties. Plenty to come, and we'll give you some information as well as to what's happening with that electioneering, because we've got some great debates coming up right here on Made in Bristol. Stay with us. Back soon. See you in a minute.